what we know, just a quick overview to bring everybody up to speed. So, who's the author of Hebrews?
We don't know.
We don't know. You guys are goofing. And to what audience was it written?
But he,
We
That's a tough
don't
one.
know.
we don't know.
It was written to the Hebrew Christians, but not the Hebrew Christians in Jerusalem. So most likely this was written to the Hebrew Christians, not in Rome, because you can tell that it was not in Rome. And many theologians think that it was perhaps the church in Corinth, but the answer is we don't know. But what we do know for sure is that it was written to the Jews who had converted to Christianity. Now, with that background, what was the purpose of the letter?
To
We
encourage
don't
them,
know.
We don't know.
Go on, Larry.
to encourage them during the pain and suffering that they were possibly going to go through, to encourage them to stand fast in the faith.
Exactly. So there's persecution that has already come upon the church. Now, keep in mind that what's happening in Rome is very difficult, and it's spreading out. And we had already seen, for example, remember in Ephesus where Paul was basically beaten, and then they had to lower him down in a basket to get outside the city, etc. Persecution in the outlying areas of Italy, Greece, Macedonia, all that was there. And then keep in mind as well that the Jews who had not converted were also persecuting the Christians. So there's like a double layer of persecution. So prior to persecution ramping up from Rome, there was already persecution taking place. So these folks, put yourself in their shoes. When they become Christians, what happens to them in terms of persecution?
They're shunned.
They're shunned.
By their church, by the Jewish temple.
Yep, kicked out of the synagogue, which was fellowship, which was the way of life, which was identity. So that's Jewish.
But also their businesses. Their businesses were so closely connected to the powers that be of the temple.
Yes.
And they said whether the people can go buy your tchotchkes or whatever.
Yes, that's true.
Oh.
So it vitally impacted,
Their business,
Their livelihood.
yes,
their kids probably were thrown out of school.
yeah.
You know, just
Well, how did young boys who were Jewish, how did they learn?
yeah. Out the temple.
Yeah, they learned at the, well, if you weren't in Jerusalem, they learned at the synagogue. And they learned from the Old Testament. They learned to read and write from the Old Testament. That's how they learned. So that's the Jewish piece of this. What about the state or Roman government piece of this? How did they persecute Christians?
Having the Romans persecute Christians?
Yeah.
They made living candles out of it.
Nero, living candles. Yeah.
Not pretty.
They,
Had
yeah,
they put-
physically got abused and
Yeah.
mistreated.
Yeah. Had their property seized. They were arrested. We saw that. They were beaten. They were stoned. They were thrown into the Colosseum for sport and pleasure. And then as things went on with Nero, of course, historians believe that he actually set part of Rome on fire, blamed it on the Christians, and then the persecution really ramped up. And that's when, you know, like in his gardens, they would grab Christians and they would wrap them in wicks, basically dipped in oil, and use them as candles in his garden during his parties. So that's how depraved it was, and fear is spreading. And we already believe that at this time Paul has been martyred, right, in Rome, and Timothy is still alive, and it's also believed that Timothy is in prison because the author of Hebrews references Timothy may be getting out, may be coming to us soon, etc. So Timothy spent some time in prison as well. So I want you to put this in proper perspective as we go through this. The author of Hebrews is speaking to the Jewish Christians. Therefore, what he's saying, big picture, is that this is why it's worthwhile. this is why you should continue to hang on. This is why it's worth the cost, basically. And he's going to go back in 1 through 9 and reiterate who Christ is and say, this is the answer, and therefore worth everything. And that's the, and he's using Old Testament scripture. He's pulling out these scriptures because he's saying Christ is the fulfillment of them. So he's reinforcing to a Jewish audience, Jesus is everything that we have hoped and prayed and dreamed for. He is it. Don't give up. We know it's tough, but it's worth it. So that's the framework for it, and we want to put it in context to the audience it was written to. So Hebrews 2:1, we must pay more careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. For if the message spoken by angels was binding, and every violation and disobedience received its just punishment, how shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? So when he's saying we must pay more careful attention to what we've heard so that we don't drift away, what do you think he's talking about?
The teachings of Jesus, the parables of Jesus, what he taught in the kingdom come, and even, to then they were still under that understanding that would be the kingdom come, correct?
Sure. And think about the concept of drifting away. In a time of persecution, as a Christian, what is the danger there to drifting away?
What do they call that? 360-degree turnabout, you just,
Not just to drift away into false teachings.
right,
Yeah.
not to drift away in false teachings, but I think it also meant be careful of your faith. If
Yes.
you don't keep your faith, increasing your faith, then you can easily go back, drift
Sure.
away.
And for Jewish Christians, the Jews in the Roman Empire at this particular time, while they were watched with, suspicion and considered very odd, they weren't enduring the type of persecution that the Christians were. So it would be easy to backpedal some and run back to the synagogue because it's safer, it doesn't cost as much personally, it's more comfortable, it's more familiar, there's a way of life that feels safer and more secure. So the drift away piece in that time and place is about safety and security, and it's not worth the cost, right? Bringing that forward in today's society, drifting away in America, what do you think that's about?
It's still you mean, because of the false teachings, as he said, you mean it as why is come to that? Is that what
Well, think about the reasons people come to Christ and then don't walk with Christ. What is that about?
commitment, they don't want to completely commit.
There's distraction in our country. It isn't so much about suffering or persecution, although that has become a piece. If you are a Christian that's really pushing in and standing up for your faith, there is some potential for, being ostracized or considered weird or, who knows what. But it's nowhere near that level. In our country, it's about paying the price on a personal level. Do I want to live a life of holiness? Do I want to live a life that is separated out from most of the people in American society? Do I want to not have fun? If I become a Christian, I don't get to, and then there's a long list of what you don't get to do. So, and then the other thing, which, Dave was talking about false teaching, unfortunately, with a lot of the teaching in the American church, it's about be blessed. It's about be happy. It's about what you should have. If you become a Christian, you should become healthy, wealthy, and wise. Well, the teaching in the New Testament to the believers was, guess what? If you become a Christian, it's going to cost you something.
Persecution.
And you can expect difficult times, and you can expect persecution. And as we go through Hebrews, it talks about the suffering of Christ. And if Christ suffered, how much more should we expect as believers to experience some of that and then see it as sharing in his sufferings and part of the blessing of drawing closer to him? Because often in our times of suffering and sorrow, those are the times that we make the greatest breakthroughs in our faith. We reach out to Christ because we desperately need him, and we find him, and we grow, right? It's just amazing. Without suffering, when we take away the cross out of Christianity, when you take away the cross out of our faith, what do you have? You have religion without power. You have man's value system, which replaces God's value system. And so while it's not the same for us in terms of drifting away, we're not drifting away because we're afraid we're going to lose our businesses or our lives. We're not abandoning Christ. We're too busy, too distracted. This world is too important to us, and so Christ is not first. And that, I believe, is not anywhere near as clear. It's much more subtle and deceptive, and we justify it in our American society because we have been raised to believe we have the right to. We have the right to personal happiness, we have the right to pursue who knows what. But the truth is, as Christians, we have given up our personal rights to Christ. We belong to him, and it is now our privilege and responsibility to serve him and follow him, and that our whole lives are filtered through his kingdom priorities, which are quite different than the kingdom of this world. So does that make sense? It's just the same thing can happen to us, but it's people don't believe it, I don't think, anymore. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Well, but I think it did, like, at 9/11, suddenly I think America was awakened to, oh my gosh, it could happen here.
Yeah.
Because before that, we were like, oh, you were
It could happen here in terms of serious trouble.
yeah. And if you read any international news at all, you can see that it's really easy. Well, even the Hitler's takeover of Germany.
Yeah.
I'm reading the book Bonhoeffer right now. Oh my gosh, those people were just so, the German people were just overtaken so easily.
Yeah.
He just, well, a lot of them.
Why? Right. Why? What is it? What makes us sit back until we're overtaken?
Non-involvement, oh well, that's not my fight, so.
Apathy.
Unbelief.
Apathy.
Yeah,
Apathy,
yeah.
unbelief. And the other piece of this, guess what, which is not much fun, is that we don't believe it can happen to us. As teenagers, we had a sense of, I'm invincible, therefore I can be in a car, and the person driving it can be drunk, and we can go 100 miles an hour on the freeway, but nothing bad will happen to me, right? It's only other people. And teenagers don't articulate it that way, but they believe that they are invincible, so they do the most ridiculous things. And so we have come to believe in our country that there is an invincibility about us. That won't happen here. We're the United States of America. It doesn't happen to us. Or this stuff happens to someone else. And we tell ourselves that stuff because we want to feel safe and we want to feel secure. But at the end of the day, what we need to know as believers is that if your life is committed to Jesus Christ, you're held in his hand. He says he knows the number of hairs on your head. The circumstances of your life are filtered through him. Just as Satan had to go to God for permission to test Job, filtered through his hands. And so we rest in that. And that's why we don't have to be afraid. I'm not afraid to fly.